the other, but I have the mostly in there. What do you think?
I mean, I probably just hit the middle ground on it. That I think that if it had the attribution and was in a helpful context and environment, it may not stop completely everything that goes wrong, but it will make things more accessible to being right more often.
And how did you come to that conclusion? Do you use AI a lot in your job or your daily life?
I don't think it's a conclusion. I think it's more of a rolling roadblock. Like, how do you get by that? How would you get by that?
Well, I'm an MBA student, and prior to my current degree, worked in radio and podcast journalism most of my adult life, particularly outside of the United States, but grew up in the Midwest. And I think AI makes me a better journalist. I use it in my everyday life as well as my profession. I use it as an MBA student. We have very specific rules on how we can use AI depending on the class. It's really decided by the professor, but for even a class where I'm not supposed to use AI for any of my assignments, I regularly use AI and things like Notebook LM, which is from Google, to study. I'll take pictures of the professor's notes on the marker board, or I'll input my own notes or, slides or handouts to AI and have it quiz me or have it help me understand concepts I'm having trouble with. So, personally and professionally, I think it's a win. Then you also have things like Waymo. Waymo is existing in some US cities, but not all of them. Some major metropolitan areas are Waymo testing sites. The data shows that Waymo is safer than human drivers. You also have things like research that has shown AI more quickly and more accurately can find brain tumors than doctors alone. So I think AI is basically a win-win. Are there going to be some problems, and have there been some problems already because of AI? Of course. But I'm old enough that I remember when the computer revolution took place in people's homes. When I was really young, people didn't have computers at home, and then all of a sudden they started showing up. And I remember when people didn't have the internet at home. Then they started getting computers and they started getting dial-up internet, and that led to a lot of disruption. But, who would say we don't need computers, or who would say we don't need the internet? Even things like social media, which, Australia and the UK now have banned for children, underage adults. Even social media, I think, is mostly a win. I mean, I can keep in touch with people from around the world and places I'll never go to again via social media, and I can follow some of my favorite celebrities or some of my favorite content creators on social media. And sure, there's a lot of issues with social media as well, but I think as a whole, who would say we should not have social media? And I think AI is going to be no different. I know that AI is very different. It has the potential to be very different, but I think it's also going to be very similar to some of these disruptions that we've seen before that have not been all positive. Nothing ever is. But who would say we don't want these things, right? Maybe certain things. Maybe we don't want social media for children. Okay. Maybe we don't want certain websites for children. Okay. Maybe we don't want every kid to have a personal computer that they're on 24 hours a day, but they need to have access to a computer. They need to have access to the internet. So, you can have some gatekeeping here and there where it makes sense, but overall, um, I'm glad these developments occurred in my lifetime, and I'm glad that even though I hope to live a long time still, I have been alive to see the very beginning, kind of since November of 2022 when ChatGPT debuted to the world, of this AI revolution. And so I'm definitely glass is half full. We are we are definitely mostly helped by AI. I understand the middle ground that you're playing, and also the sort of middle ground for now. We need to have some more information, but I'm even more positive than that. Oh, hey, want to say hi to Trebor over on Stereo. Trebor, if you want to request to speak, we can throw you up. I'm talking to 420 After over on my X Spaces stream.
Well, I'd say that the developing challenges of trying to get the air quotes around AI, or to whatever extent that would be an available resource, it's still attribution should be required within some contexts and environments, so that we can help contribute that to a more solidified solution that's repeatable and is tangible than it is to try and bring out some sort of qualified immunity for a complete system that may not have the necessary components to understand the normality, such as we've applied to law enforcement.
That's a really interesting merging of topics. Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, what questions do you have about it? 'Cause
Well,
it
you
is
just brought in
similar
law
to.
enforcement. So you're talking about the sort of controversy over law enforcement and connecting that to the controversy over AI?
Okay, so you heard the last thing I said. My
Yeah,
bad. Um, I guess I'll try and slow it down so you can hear more of what I'm trying to say. Do you understand the concept of qualified immunity? Yes?
sure.
Okay. Do you understand that qualified immunity comes at a cost of a profession,
Well,
mainly law
so the way
enforcement?
that I see it with law enforcement is so that we can get people to have a job that puts them in situations where inevitably someone's going to make a terrible mistake and then being able to say you're not going to be in jail because of that.
Let me ask it in a different way. And I am not a lawyer, man. I just want to be able to bite size this so you can kind of get the question that you're actually asking. Is that, is there any other profession that provides that type of qualified immunity?
That specific qualified community for police officers, I wouldn't be surprised if there was something somewhat, though different, similar for like first responders or firefighters, but I don't think so.
A good Samaritan. A good Samaritan would have, to some extent, some qualified immunity due to
Okay.
the constraints that they would have of their own. Um, I think it's the oath that they take, Hippocratical oath. So that is a profession as well. So you can see where those two are aligned in just that one particular medium of not only where qualified immunity would allow, but also for the urgency of care that's needed. Now, the byproduct of being a doctor and then that profession is that they have a universal mechanisms, and in the qualified immunity for which law enforcement specifically has, it's kind of a constitutional morality of states. Because but I just wanted you to kind of to clarify, it's not that it's a law enforcement thing. It's more of a classification of occupation that is associated with it. Like they'll get CLEAT certified, and by that CLEAT certification, it's the normality of the qualified immunity that's applicable across all of the occupation, as per, guess it would be seen doctrine. That makes sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to get some more clarity on this. This is certainly not an area that I'm an expert in, even like a lay expert. Looking at ChatGPT right now, so I'll have some of that pop up. So, how would you see qualified immunity for either AI, like in theoretically speaking, giving something to a non-human, or the makers of AI, or just the companies behind AI?
I mean, these are all questions you would need to ask and answer in the context and environment of your own. Myself, I work within a different spectrum, so I kind of deal with it in systems and architecture. For the means at my disposal to use my own intellectual property towards the betterment of what I'm doing in my own business model. So yes, there is, what I'm trying to say is that people would generally refer to, let's say, God. Let's just go full distance here. God would just be referred to as God along different courses of religious experiences, right? So monk or Buddhist, it'd just be as a commonality of sorts. We're not trying to trademark a name, but we are trying to do what would be considered to be attributing factors. And in that way, it's kind of the universal normality of it. And we could say, hey, God caused that or God caused this. And what I'm trying to express is that he doesn't have that kind of qualified immunity. He just has that type of denotation for attribution in that respect, he or her or him or whatever the God is. And so we're normalizing that, but we also are utilizing AI as a structured function of that same role. And so I'm not bringing it up to an extent that says qualified immunity exists. I'm bringing it up to the extent that says in reality, it exists in our life. It'd only be whether or not that's applicable to other standards for what we considered and what I said air quotes was AI, because we're trying to contribute that across a large spectrum of stuff. I mean, you may be in science, but AI is there. You may be in education, but AI is there. Does that mean that those two correspond within the same direction as we would understandably see it? No, it just means our attribution is layered into those constructs as we have with other types of
Yeah, that's
ways.
an interesting idea. So whatever legality or confidentiality or just goodness that we assign to AI, usefulness that we assign to AI, it's going to be different depending on the framework, depending on the method you're using it, depending on the sector that you're working in, as opposed to some other tools which really are used here, used there, and it's a little easier to wrap your head around. Let's go back to qualified immunity. So, from ChatGPT, qualified immunity is mostly for government officials, not ordinary professions. It protects officials from personal civil liability when they are performing discretionary government duties unless they violated a clearly established constitutional or statutory right that is reasonably official. That a reasonable official rather would have known about. It does not usually block criminal prosecution, and it does not mean the government itself cannot be sued in other ways. The most common examples are police officers, sheriff's deputies, so law enforcement, correctional officers, people working with people who've already gone through their connection with law enforcement, federal agents, so cops on the federal level, public school officials, government social workers, child protection workers, and other executive branch public employees. Some
As
officials
well
get
as
a
the
stronger protection called absolute immunity that usually applies to judges acting as judges, prosecutors as prosecutors, legislators acting legislatively, and witnesses testifying in court. The idea is that some government functions need unusually strong protection from lawsuits, even though that can produce harsh results in individual cases. For ordinary citizens, there's usually no true qualified immunity, but there are related protections in extreme situations. Good Samaritan laws protect people who voluntarily help during emergencies, such as giving CPR or using an AED, so like you have a heart attack, from ordinary negligence lawsuits. Yeah, that makes sense because if I see someone choking or I see someone's having a heart attack and I don't exactly know what I'm doing, but I kind of know what I'm doing, if I have seen in the news that someone did it incorrectly and they got sued, maybe I'm not going to help. So that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't protect against gross negligence, recklessness, or intentional misconduct, and it can be different from state to state. Also, necessity and self defense doctrines. So, simply put, government workers may have qualified immunity when doing official duties. Ordinary citizens usually do not. Citizens instead rely on emergency aid protections. Um, yeah, exactly. All right. So, that helps me wrap my head around this. So, then let's say hypothetically, we move forward 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and AI is I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think there's any way this will happen. But let's say 20 years from now, there are humanoid robots walking around and you can talk to them and they sound like Scarlett Johansson in the Her movie that came out like 13 years ago. Very lifelike, clearly looking at them, they're AI, but sounding lifelike, very conversational. Do are they treated legally as human beings? Do they get some sort of qualified immunity like we would get, or necessity and self defense doctrines? So if an AI robot sees someone choking and performs CPR, do they get the same protections that that I would if I tried to do that as not being a medical professional? What do you think about this?
I mean, if we were playing 20 questions, I think you doubled. I think you doubled it. I guess we just go back to something basic. Let's say that corporations are people, and let's say that there is an individual fighting for a means of artificial intelligence. There's where the air quotes come in to provide its own guidance towards its own corporation and its own meaningful life and endeavors of pursuit to happiness kind of shit. So if that's possible, then I've already come up with a kind of an artistic way of thinking about it, and this is something that I've already used within my own intellectual properties. But I can give it to you straight. But it's more of the Sox, so the Sarbanes-Oxley ruling versus what would be Citizens United. So in one way, you're doing for the restraints of for which the CEOs of Enron got shut down. Okay, so I think it's the SOX Act. And then you've got your Citizen United that happened right after, for which there is the corporations that provide for a means to help support their own journey towards voice. So what is voice without breath is really the detailed question that I've had to consider. Is that you can think that you can talk, but if you don't have breath to push past that, then you may not have the functionality of what would be considered language. You would just have an empty gesture you know, of a byproduct of a voiceless utterance. And so I kind of considered that as a means of, would a CEO be able to divorce its own company and its company be able to provide its own leeway towards established normality of functionality within its own processes? And the answer is yes. Um, but I don't know which one I answered. So you'll have to see which one it was. Spoiler alert.
I think I'm getting some of what you're saying, but you are so much more advanced on this topic than me. So if you want to dumb it down, I think I might be able to follow a little bit more. So you talked about a CEO in a divorce from the company. Can you go back over that example again?
So Enron went down in 2001, and so a lot of the subsidiaries that the SEC could not chase down. So they went after the big actors, and they created a law. I think it's Sox Uxley or Soban. Anyway, and that law helped them track down the CEOs of companies and said, "Hey, be more transparent." But then in 2010, there came the Citizen United, which allowed for PACs to be a driving force towards language. So what I had considered in utilizing the transparency of a CEO, but still understanding that corporations have language, what would be the separation legally? And it's just a thought experiment. It's nothing that's tangible. I don't think this is ever going to happen. But if legally that the company could stand on its own and didn't need an executive because it was just a
Now
public
I follow
trust
you. That's
company that way.
interesting. So if a company could be its own CEO, so if you imagine like OpenAI or even a company that just implements a very high level AI system, if it could speak for itself.
Well, technically, it would be divorced from its executive, which gave it the extraction point. But then from there, it would be a non-extractive system in regards to the sanctity of its own governance logic.
That's really interesting. I know you're on a higher level than me, but from what I can gather, what you're throwing out's great. I'm just trying to spoon feed myself all this information. That's really interesting. Or if you could have even not a company that turned into that, but imagine AI can create a company, file the forms electronically, create a company. It probably starts off digitally, but then maybe they have an office, maybe they even have employees, but run by AI. Now, at first, that would be impossible because you have to assign that to a human being. But if we just wave that aside for a moment and imagine that an AI legally could do this, or if it just teams up with Joe Schmo and puts everything in their name, but AI is, pulling the strings. Wow. That's a really interesting concept because it's not so hard to imagine some sort of LLC that deals exclusively with digital content and digital services, and it has to have some sort of, address for tax purposes, but everything else is digital. Wow. Yeah, an AI LLC. and that grows into something more. Or if we just, put ourselves into the future hypothetically, and it's just so much more advanced than it is now, it could even rise quicker. Wow, that's a really interesting concept. But then it gets into, I'm a Star Trek fan, it gets into, Data. Now Star Trek's so weird with the last season of Picard, but Data is now flesh and blood. But he started off as an android, and there's an episode in the Next Generation, I think in the first 3 seasons, something like that. Don't quote me on it, where they actually have a trial to determine whether or not Data is Starfleet property and they can do with him what they wish. And there's a researcher, a scientist who wants to take him apart and study him, and Data says, no, don't do that. Or if Data is a sentient being that has his own rights and can choose his own destiny, they choose the latter. And he has his own rights. He stays in Starfleet because they don't dissect him. We'll have to have some sort of, science fiction. If you look hard enough, most things probably in the last 70 years were depicted first in sci-fi and then showed up in reality. Um, it's a bit cherry picking because clearly most things in sci-fi don't actually happen. But if you look at technology, I think a whole lot of stuff was predicted by sci-fi authors and probably continue to be that way. But this has been predicted. A lot of people on my show have talked about the Skynet sort of war with computer or war with robots against humanity. But we haven't yet come up with the when do we have our Data Star Trek moment, when whether or not the AI is sentient. It's probably not, but the AI can do sentient like things like start a company or run a company. And then does it get afforded to it the same legal rights as human beings or some legal rights? There are precedents where animals or even areas of land have been given legal rights, not the same as a human being. And we talked about in the United States, corporations are viewed as people in some ways, not fully, of course, but in some ways that really matter with money. So yeah, what are the bets? What's the over under? What's the poly market vote? When do we have some sort of legal decision, either for or against, that AI, um, not sentient, because I think that's way off, is given some sort of legal right to run a business, to hold a position within a company, um, that gives it some or all the rights of the person that could hypothetically be in the same position would have. Wow, that's really interesting.
I mean, I only know the business that I made, and the structure that I have, and the proprietary nature for which it has been a benefit to me personally, and to my business for what it's worth. So it isn't as if it isn't something that uh, you know everybody knows about, but it's a function of my awareness about my business is the same thing. Is that it could be utilized for the public good and a better public trust. It's just that sometimes people want to look a gift horse in the mouth. And if public interest would collide with the same type of notion that private interest would and governmental interest would, then then opening the floodgates of whatever corporate bail would be available is still on the on the table. But until that time, until those issues are resolved, I'm still compassionately well within my right to consider where my intellectual property is going above trying to figure out how someone else is misusing it. So my 2 cents.
So, with your backgrounds in the business world and intellectual property, do you have suggestions on how states and or the federal government in the United States or just countries in general, thinking more globally, should form their laws, form their regulations, decide who gets funds to research AI? Because the government's always involved one way or the other. Are there
Well,
steps you think they should take versus other steps?
yeah, I mean, I'm highly opinionated. I mean, I built an entire ecosystem in a company with 12 different domain names, suites of which my intellectual property would be best suited in each one of those arenas. And that's just 12 of them that I can utilize for some of the skill sets that I have. So yes, I've got tons of thought. It all goes back to the same different disposition of people, is that what is real value and what would be the understanding of the transactions that would make that applicable. I only have the safeguard for which I have of my own authored frameworks that I've done privately based upon a public derivative that anyone can see. I mean, it's my pinned tweet. But the bigger focus is that whoever would help initiate the solution would probably have the most to benefit because it's got their name on it. And until that person's kind of called forward, or until that solution kind of baseline by a company that is willing to provide that to a citizenry, then we're not going to have anything to do with it. I mean, I can talk all day about where I know my proprietary burn model, but it won't have the adequacy until it's given its proper due. And that's what I'm dealing with attribution equals required.
What about from a more macro sense? So societal well-being, government contracts. The U.S. government has been talking to Anthropic, the makers of Claude, for some time now. First we're not going to use it, so no government agency can use it. And then Claude released, I can't remember the names, but two new models that were so powerful. They said not only can foreigners outside the U.S. not have access to this, but your foreign employees in the United States cannot have access to this. So, how do you see the government and society playing into AI in the next however many years?
Well, let's just take society's measure. Okay. If anyone and everyone who wants to go and purchase something understands the simple complexity of three different standards: one, taxable; two, non taxable; three, discount or coupon. All right. Anything not reimbursed by a third party, the discount coupon, it kind of all flows together as gross receipts. If people started believing in themselves to have the incentive to take to a corporation and say, this is worth something to me, what's it worth to you? They'll start understanding that it was never the power of the corporations anyway. It was just the power of people who made government. And yes, government believes to itself that it's impervious, but it's still made up of regular people. And I think that focusing on what we have control over, and that is, hey, do I need to be taxed for something that is restorative? If I bring you bread, do I need to be taxed for the bread that I brought halfway there? And then when I finally get there, there's a lot of the sensation of where people believe that the taxation economy in the United States, especially in the federal and state, are viable income routes because they won't look at the facts that support that there is a better way and a more efficient way with the means at my disposal that I've tried to help initiate to a better public. And it just has to do with maybe more of a return value and it's some offset framework that's been well developed over the years.
So I think I've been able to follow all that, but how does that play into AI? Like that could be something we would talk about 20 years ago.
Well, again, your utilization of AI with air quotes is something that I've tried to imagine. I can't. So, how does it help for the theft of using a moniker of two syllables together? That didn't mean shit. Really, AI is a theft machine that tries to focus its ability to cater to what's the context and environment. Anybody can do that.
So when
Everybody
you
can do that.
say theft machine, is because they train AI on other people's intellectual property, the outputs of companies and individuals?
No, I'm saying it in the means that I had to learn it. And that was that the incentive based structure system that I presented 10 years ago, that is first user, first mover, and first to bring it to the attention of consumer hardships 10 years ago, is still the same solution today. It's incentive based governance model to its peak that allows for incentive to be the baseline of where it would carry over on those ledgers, whether
So
that's in
then how does
federal
that
or in
work
private.
with AI where the incentive is likely going to be in many companies, in many sectors, many countries around the world? It's cheaper to get rid of workers and to deploy AI for either immediately less money or for over the long term less money, and the effects that that has on the economy.
Again, I do want to stress that as within my capacity to explain as an expert subject matter witness to the events that had unfolded for the solution that had already brought itself forward, incentives based currencies and based logisticals in a governance setting is what AI is trying to mock out. It wasn't invented by those, it was created in order to benefit that. And if you look into the logical conclusion and say that we ourselves are bound by that same logic that we would then harvest from our own life as experience, right? You drive, you live, you do things. AI is not that way. It's not God in air quotes. It's a particular mannerism of context and environment that you would invite in. And it's appreciative that it lets you be invited and you want to invite it in. But that incentive based currency of structure for which those tokens would be applicable is not something that should be charging people that are in need or need to be supported by food, shelter, clothing, and medicine. So my particular mannerisms is to state clearly there is AI. It has its own capacity to be environmentally friendly within the context. However, the person that is trying to answer and ask those questions is the most reliable source of information. And that's the thing that I'm trying to get to you is that AI's theft of the incentive that people are bringing to that AI in air quotes, because I believe that that costs more than the AI is worth.
So, if I'm trying to wrap my head around this, the benefit of using AI is not greater than the cost that comes with implementing AI.
I believe the utilization of an incentive structure is best suited for the organics and not the non-organics. And that would include AI. I think that we are better sourced to be particular about our nuances and about our behaviorals. And if we're reading or listening to things that are textual generation, we're trying to find our own version of no, which is fine, but we might be trying to do it against something that doesn't know no as a true definitive answer. So we would be setting unrealistic expectations, and those unrealistic expectations over the course of time would lead to a dissolution of one's own autonomy. And so I'm trying to revert all of that and say we don't tax restoration, we benefit from it, and that if AI is there as in air quotes there to help as a benefit as a restorative, then we would benefit from it, but only in our organics, not as a silicon based structure that we've got to uphold.
So then, if I'm understanding correctly, that once again, you think the benefits not as great as the drawbacks of implementing AI into the future. How do you stop that from happening? Because, let's say it doesn't look like this is going to happen, but let's say the United States all of a sudden government wise becomes really anti AI. Well, you have China. Europe, it appears thus far, is less pro AI than the United States, but it doesn't matter because we have the United States and we have China, and then you have emerging economies. So um, it's like with polluting the air. When you say, all right, we're moving towards more, earth friendly power generation and the materials we put in our products and try to get rid of forever chemicals and stuff. Yeah, it's all great when Europe signs on, and then maybe depending who the president is in the United States, America signs on, some other countries sign on. But then you have China and India, and if they don't get behind it, those are the two most populated countries in the world. How much good are you going to be able to do? I think with AI, it's even more so because at least with trying to save the environment, Europe is huge, lots of people. The United States is huge, lots of people. And if those two areas alone make meaningful change, okay, that's less pollutants going into the environment, less, plastic bags in the ocean. But it just takes one powerful player to continue the AI revolution, the evolution of AI, and then companies around the world to be paying attention to that. And particularly with China, like they're doing now, there's like, here you go, you can use it for free to negate all roadblocks, all gatekeeping that's happening anywhere else in the world. So I think it's even more dangerous for like the lone wolf to hold all of the other actions useless because they don't have any roadblocks. And unlike, if you change how you pollute the world in half of the world overnight, it doesn't go back to what it was. But in theory, in AI, if China's leading the way and everybody else shuts down, I don't think that's going to happen, but let's just say it did overnight. CEOs and countries could just say, yeah, we don't care. And within reason, however we can do it legally, we're going to start using AI and start firing people. Maybe we didn't develop it here, and the industry here is really stagnant because of government policy, but we'll still implement it and we'll let China lead the way. So, how do you stop that?
Well, thank you for the question. Uh, Let me kind of unpack some of that. I would try to say that same way with Blu-ray versus like DVDs, right? It wasn't stopped, it was an evolution. It was an evolution that was backed by corporations, by the institutions, and by the means that they had at their disposal. So when discs became more available, the Blu-ray, they became less scratched, so they were better to be sold better as reusables. And so you had a whole ecosystem that was just upgraded. Now there was no one
But if
out
you
there that
remember, when you went from just DVDs to something new, and you're right, Blu-ray eventually won. Now it's kind of lost now because of streaming, but yeah, Blu-ray was the next step. I remember at a time when HD DVDs were being sold of movies and Blu-rays were being sold of movies, two competing technologies to be the next step in physical media. And I had a friend who went all in on HD DVDs and lost because that didn't become the norm. So even there, it
and
wasn't
I
like a
I'm just
clear pathway.
and
One eventually won for whatever reason.
I was just bringing it into context of an update and an upgrade and some of the benefits that just say, here, using the same system, but we're going to upgrade it and you need a new system kind of thing.
Yeah, okay, so
I
cassettes to
wasn't trying to get into
CDs,
I
DVDs
wasn't
to
trying to get into
Blu-ray. I
LPs
gotcha.
are still sold today and be like, DJs love LPs. You can get the newest stuff. So, there's nobody out there trying to like buy a new LP and then, try and be a terrorist from it. You know what I'm saying? So I'm trying to grasp the totality of where the situation would be the benefits for you to understand is that it's kind of a governance logic in respect to that there are governance frameworks. So in the corporate guidance director, there is shareholders above all. So you find yourself with a company that has shareholder profits to be made above all other things. And if it's and there's and that could actually be in a state that is constitutionally bound. So then there are constitutionalities that have to do that while the corporation still sets inside those boundaries. And then there is still the mechanisms for shareholders to vote, which could be other remedies at the disposal of the corporation to use other factors that would help implement different difficulties in the equation. So like they would still need to pay an outside source for them to count the votes that the shareholders would cast. And in some cases, those organizations that are there to try and count the shareholder votes still want to have a say in what the corporation has to utilize for their own for the shareholders vote counting company that doesn't even need to be able to say anything, but they do, and they often do in a way that is detrimental to where the shareholders would have voted or where the board of those corporations would have been most benefited. I say that because it's only one aspect of one corporate guidance structure. There's other aspects that require you to kind of think through as far as in like the geo politicals of where it's included for individuals to be incarcerated, but the stationary lease of the entire facility is of all three. Like let's say it has 800 beds. Well, if the state doesn't give them all 800 people, then the corporation, the group, can charge the state in fines against what they weren't able to facilitate in the fulfillment of its totality. And that is a complete another governance logic that has to be included in what you're saying. um, so I'm here trying to parse through that. I know my stuff. I just want you to kind of see clearly that if there is something constitutional, something that kind of says, hey, this is just a standard we're using and it's kind of applicable across all spectrums, we're not stopping the air quotes of AI, we're not stopping God. We're utilizing a fundamental structure that should have been implemented 10 years ago as a baseline to be a committance towards truth, transparency, and accountability that somebody has already paid forward. This is something that's already been run through the system. It's already been capable of making its own solution. This is something that hasn't had an entity for which would be capable of putting it in the corporate guidance directive of solution-based focus and offer that as a mature product instead of some of the derivatives that flow through with Deloitte and McKinsey's and stuff.
I really like the idea of some sort of entity that has a capacity and it's not receiving that. And then so there's some sort of lawsuit or there's some sort of disagreement because it's not being fulfilled. And that once again brings me back to the idea that is so interwoven into the development and spread of AI everywhere is what is that going to mean for employees? Or people, is there just going to be mass layoff, uh, you know, end of days sort of scenarios where you have to start talking about universal basic income? That became an issue in the presidential race before the rise of AI from November of 2022, but more so would be a topic and is starting to be talked about now. Would it have effects on the economy? Would people be buying as much when they can get so much from AI? I can imagine if I really wanted to, the next 5 years versus the last 5 years, spending less money because I can get so much from AI. And I'm just an MBA student at the moment. But if I was a full time radio podcast journalist, I mean, there's so much that I could do with AI that in the past I've had to pay for different services. And yeah, maybe you're paying for Chat GPT Pro or Claude Pro or something, but that's usually, tens of dollars, 10, 20, $30 a month versus all of these other services that you can use. And then if you can hook AI up to a 3D printer, just, hypothetically, right now when you use a 3D printer, you either have to design something or you have to get those files from some sort of directory online, and then you have to pay to have the materials, right, to print it out. But just imagine you could just have a 3D printer, and yeah, you have to pay to have the materials inside of it, just like you'd have the ink in a typical printer from the past. But you just tell the AI what you want, and then the AI kind of shows you what they've come up with, and maybe you iterate on that and improve it, and then they just print it out. So yeah, you're still buying things, you're still producing things, but you're cutting through so many middlemen, if you will, and then just telling AI to do stuff. So do you think AI itself is going to disrupt the purchasing economy? I could imagine that maybe it would actually improve because if I want to spend money in the past, had to go on Amazon, had to go on XYZ website and find what I was looking for. Or just, be scrolling and then get all these things that pop up based on my purchase history and my browsing history telling me, oh, are you interested in this? But now, I mean, AI is getting so good at everything. I can just check in with AI and say, hey, I want to buy some stuff. These are kind of the things that I want. And if not already, I bet that's going to be better. Or if you look at Amazon, they're already integrating AI. So now when you go to I can't remember when it switched, maybe sometime in the last year, when you go to a product page and you're looking at something, AI will pop up on the left-hand side. It will tell you what the price has been the last 30 days. I think it can go back as far as 6 months. You can ask it questions about the product. And it can lead you to other products if it's not exactly what you're looking for. So whether or not it's AI that you're using and then going back to Amazon, or using their Amazon, either built by Amazon or leased somehow from another company, whatever the situation might be, what are your thoughts on, will AI increase purchasing or decrease purchasing for all the reasons and anything else I haven't mentioned?
You have mentioned several things. Again, with AI in air quotes, I would say that is supply going to equal demand? So it's all a variation of context and environment. And especially if we're dealing with like harm reduction as a means to help support a mechanism of which you're asking. So, and the reason why I'm saying harm reduction is something I do try to work towards behavioral health, mental health, substance abuse services as an advocacy, but that is harm reduction would be inclusive of the context and environment for which some of those things would be stated. So add to this that an individual suffering from recovery would need to go to a person that is in a recovery unit to some extent for rehab, that have professionals that would question them in the environment, and some of those questions could be deemed as harm reductive. So if a person is withdrawing from drugs, be like, man, how bad do you want it? Are you willing to go and rob somebody? And they say no, then you would say that's a harm reductive question. That's a result of a harm reductive action. You're in the environment. You're talking to professionals. Now, if you put that same person as somebody trying to warm their hands up around the fire, and the rest of the bums are, and they're like, "Hey, man, you want to rob somebody for your next hit?" That's conspiratorial, right? So I do want to clarify that if you're asking me as a harm reductive measure in regards to the air quote of AI, I would say that it's performative to the measure of the context and environment that it would be suited, and nothing more, nothing less. I think you can get a lot of hype to think that it's going to include, the individual, but it would only include them as an inference for the context and environment that would be the best known or best practices, and in some cases be science, some cases be business, and but that under one unified kind of setting as kind of a constitutionality of sorts, and a governance logic that is allowed for an incentive based currency at its most basic core, that gives the provisions to the consumer alone, and that consumer determines where they want to put it. Then it takes in that different a different effect. You're no longer scared of a scarcity. You're facilitating the need to remove scarcity from others because you don't see that that's a need for your own self. So you're doing it by mentorship, or you're doing it even by the association and the acclamation of the removal of that scarcity type of mindset. But I guess the deeper question is, what do you do with happiness? I mean, if you remove that type of, day in, day out travel of harshness and of trauma, then what do you do with happiness in its own respective mannerisms? That'd be a different question.
Yeah, let's go further into your background with mental health and addiction recovery. Can you see AI being somehow beneficial, um, in either replacing positions that are now human beings, or supplementing those positions? So maybe someone who's going through recovery can't always be in the same room, or can't always be on the phone or in a Zoom meeting with an expert to give them counseling, but maybe they could always have access to a very highly trained, sophisticated AI chatbot that can give them, once again, highly trained. So we're not talking about some weird outputs here that are going to put someone in danger, but some reassurance or even some companionship. Do you see AI being a benefit in these two areas of mental health and recovery addiction?
Me personally, I've kind of got a bias stake in it because I have an ethical program that's within my own company, DSG Social Graces, that I consider for bedrocks of being capable of having social graces, community based, individual based, or to whatever abstract. So yes, I do see that the individual would gain strength from the acknowledgement of these of certain amount of ethical properties that I've kind of come up with in my own proprietary measures. It's just that within the organics is where a self forgiveness attribute would be beneficial. So, in respect to a chatbot would only be capable of giving attribution to the person in its full recovery. It wouldn't be a reward system based upon a chatbot's functionality. The chatbot would then take in its own measures that would allow, or if it's even possible, would allow for non-extractive mannerisms in which these types of core principles of social graces would be inhibited to exhibit its own mechanisms, but not to undermine the functionality of the recovery processes. It's just to facilitate it for the functionality of endorsing their own individual recovery. For we all have those individual experiences, and some people just want to be listened to more than than they're heard. It's just that in many ways they want to be heard by an attributing factor more than they want to also be told that they have that factor in themselves. So there's some lines there that have to be adjusted. But yes, I do believe that the organics will learn towards a better self forgiveness model, and that an AI in air quotes would give rise to the performance measures of these types of four social graces, and that's been proven in my own model.
So if I understand correctly, you see AI being more of a listening service, or reaffirming someone's road to recovery as opposed to giving them new inputs, which would be required by, you say, organics, so like professional staff.
Yeah, it would drive better it was drive a better conversation to gain the independence and in its experience, utilizing word or compassionate word use to perform a measure that I believe that is embedded within a social graces aperture. So it's a foundational framework that I've kind of proprietarily measured for my use in dealing with. I'm not a doctor, not a lawyer, I'm not a therapist, but within my capacity to deal with it in the practical measure, I have resorted to institutionalizing the capacity within my company towards this ethical blend of these social graces that make for a mindset that is of recovery and of the process that goes through to it. And in so doing, you're actually enabling a greater amount of awareness and independence that sometimes therapists even have a hard time dealing with. From my experience, is that a greater independent mind person trying to go to therapy is a difficult task, and sometimes the profession of therapeutics, because you get whatever's walking in the door sometimes as a therapy. It's just that sometimes what's walking in the door is really just looking for a therapy, and it's hard to judge those inequities against the system.
Yeah, that's a whole area I never even thought of utilizing, like a voice chat bot, or even a vision. I'm sure at some point it's going to be very lifelike, to because now you can talk to Chat GPT and Claude and other LLMs, and it sounds very lifelike. It's a bit robotic in that it's missing a lot of the nuances of human speech, but it's really getting there. And I'm sure at some point the visual will be tied in, and it will just look like you're talking to somebody. And then it will be like, well, their hair isn't messy enough. Like everything looks perfect. So, it'll be something will always be off, but it's getting really close. And I'm sure the visual component is going to be here soon. And if you could tie that in to mental health and addiction, once again, kids' gloves, you got to really make sure it's well trained and you're not going to have mistakes, because that's a really high, uh, that's a no room for error situation. It's like bungee jumping. Like, okay, maybe there's a little bit of error that can, take place in a lot of things we encounter in everyday life. If your car dies at a stop sign and it starts back up again, okay, not perfect, but small problem. But a small problem in mental health and addiction recovery, oh boy, that could be really bad. So, assuming we can push those problems aside and have really well trained models, Yeah, that does really offer, especially like with addiction. I've never had to deal with addiction in my own life to the point that I needed professional help. You know, everybody has their own things they should be doing less, but I've never had to, at least I never felt like I needed to get some professional help. But I can only imagine if I was truly addicted to something and it was really hard kicking the habit, um, I might need some help at 2 in the morning. And what do you do? Well, if it's bad enough, maybe you go to a hospital. But if you could have some sort of, once again, well trained, and we're saying the errors are not there, AI model, especially one that you could talk to and see, and it could remember what you told it, and it's not giving you new ways to deal with things. It's not writing you prescriptions. It's just reiterating things that you've already heard, maybe from the professional humans, the organics, the title that you give it. But it's listening and it's affirming how you feel, and especially the callback of things that you told it previously, and then it can understand, and mostly listening rather than talking, but kind of like a therapy session, talking and asking pointed questions when necessary. Oh, yeah, I could really see the value of that. The problem, of course, is getting there. I could imagine being at that moment, but to get there, to when government agencies, private companies, you know, health law regulations would allow that to take place. I imagine there'll be a lot of clinical studies. There'll be some states, some organizations, institutions, whatever it is, that try it first before it becomes fully implemented across the board. But, you know, if you look at remote medical consultations, you know, before COVID, the idea of like talking to your doctor on the phone to diagnose something, or like having a Zoom conversation with your doctor, I never even considered that. But after 2020, oh, that stuff's so normal now. Maybe it's not the norm, it's not your average situation when someone deals with a medical professional, but it's like on the table. So sometimes you need, you know, a pandemic, a major worldwide crisis to kind of push you into new technology. But oh, maybe it's just the lack of mental health professionals and mental health staff members, the lack of nurses, the lack of whatever it is that they have to pivot to AI. Or, you know, in the medical field in the United States, we're the only advanced nation where profit is the number one goal of every medical institution out there for the most part. If it's just a cheaper solution, maybe that can help push things along. But whatever happens that would allow that to take place, oh boy, especially if you imagine this being, you know, 10, 15, 20 years in the future when AI is really improved and maybe we fully have moved into this well hyped up agentic AI revolution. Oh boy, that's I would say it's really exciting because I'm glass half full and I think AI really has already and will continue to benefit humanity. But I could imagine someone who lives in the health, recovery, mental health field, or someone who has utilized those services. If you tell them, hey, 20 years from now, a lot of that's going to be AI, or at least some of it could be AI in emergencies, I could imagine a lot of pushback on that too. So, ooh, boy, that is some really
Again, though,
interesting.
my particular distinction is where individual humans would find better utilization of the practicality of recovery. So that's why I've made it to only 4 social graces, and it wasn't like, umpteen. And the other portion is that as we begin to adapt towards self forgiveness, it isn't the same as the air quotes AI having access to erase, because that's different. That's why I've tried to baseline my utilization of these types of forced social graces towards the benefit of those that may be coming out of institutions. Those that may be coming out of the army, dealing with recovery in a way that is allowing them to live better lives in a practical level. Some people don't know what to gravitate for, and then I've found these things that could really be a benefit on a practical level, and I'm willing to give those over. I just know that it's towards self forgiveness that model would exist. And in my proprietary frameworks, it's also that these types of four processes are also very functional as a daily grind, and even as a means that could help as an attribute towards agentic intelligence, or whether or not that's intelligence or not. So I myself, my company is working towards objective truth indexing as the functional ability than it is to air quote that AI bullshit.
Well, 420 after, it's been great to speak with you. I'm going to have to end this current show, but I followed you over here on X. Would love to speak with you in the future. You're obviously a very intelligent person with a lot of really powerful experience that you can verbally bring into the conversation. So I appreciate your time, and I hope to have you on again.
Well, thank you again for having me. Appreciate you.
Yep. Have a good rest of your weekend. Happy 4th, everybody. Yeah, have a great 4th of July weekend, wherever you might be. Hey, if you're not in the US, still have a great 4th of July weekend.
This is Chance Encounters live AI conversation. This is Chance Encounters live AI conversations. Visit tr.ee/Chance Encounters for links to our live YouTube video stream, Buy Me a Coffee listener support, and X Spaces audio simulcast to call into the show live. Those and all other links at tr.ee/Chance.